All right, I promised I'd show you how to solder a battery cable on, so here we go. First off, some of the tools you're gonna need. You're gonna need something to strip your sheath on your battery cable. You're going to need some flux for your wire itself. You're gonna need heat shrink tubing, and you wanna get a good high quality heat shrink tubing. You wanna get like a 3-to-1 with the moisture barrier in it, so a sealant in it. So don't go cheap there. You're gonna need some solder. I just use a 60-40 solder. That's worked good. It's just a little heavier than most solders, but it works good for doing these heavy duty cables. You're gonna need a torch to heat it, and then you're gonna need whatever you're attaching it to. So here we have the quick disconnect. You'll see these on, for our instance, it's gonna be on the winch. Sometimes you'll see these on like tow truck rigs for jumping up, for hooking up, for doing jump starts and that. The nice thing about these, they're pretty universal. They only go one direction, so as long as you install them correctly, it's gonna match up. So if you ever need to jump anything, you can just plug these in versus trying to find your battery and hook battery cables and that. You can just plug these right in. So the nice thing is it'll be set up on front and rear on the Snowcat, so we can move the winch back and forth without having to do any de-wiring or anything like that. It's toolless. So and then if we ever need to jump or jump start somebody else, we'll be able to just quick plug these into a set of jumper cables and jump somebody. So that's a really nice benefit about having these quick disconnects. And so we'll need to pop the lug out. There's a tang in here. You just push that down, and that's what holds the lug in place, and then your lug will pop out. And you can see that's pretty good size. This is rated for 175 amps. Our winch itself is 150, so you always want to make sure that you oversize your electrical components, because if you undersize electrical components, what happens is you generate excess heat. Excess heat leads to failure, burned out motors, burned out brushes, the works. So same way with your battery cables. If at all possible, you want to oversize them for your load. So don't cheapen out on your battery cables. Make sure these here, I've got a guy off eBay that I've had make all my cables since I discovered him about 10 years ago. He does an awesome job. He uses marine grade annealed battery cables. So it's a pure copper with an anneal process that is corrosion resistant as possible. So, and then it has a heavy duty EMPD coating on it, so you're not going to get that magnetic interference. And it's just, these are good cables. You can see how flexible they are, so you can route them wherever you need to. And that heavy thick coating on that is going to give you an extra set of abrasion resistance. So, and he does a stand-up job on crimping his ends on, and he's got that good heat shrink on there too. So to get started, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to size the lug up to our sheathing. So the main thing here is you want it to butt up tight. So you're going to want to cut that back just a little bit shorter than the end of the cable. So this looks like about 1 inch. Because your solder will take up room in your lug. So, and as you cut the coating, don't cut too deep, especially the better the cable you have, the finer the strands it will be. Because another tidbit is electricity never travels down the core of a wire. It travels around the outside of the wire or cable. So therefore, the more strands you have, the more outside dimensions you have. And with all them outside strands is where all your electricity is going to be carried at. So that's why the more strands you have, the better the cable you have. So as I pull that out, I always give it a nice little twist, and that just helps keep your wire together. So we're going to dry fit this just to make sure that we're going to have a nice tight seal here. It's always a little tricky when your cable's exactly the same. So it's going to butt up right tight there, and that's what we want. If you do happen to have it a little too long, you can always trim the cables down with that. So the next step is put your shrink tubing on. You want to do that first, because if you do that after you put your flux on, or anybody that's forgot to put the shrink tubing on, you know what I'm talking about. It's sometimes you can't get it on. Lucky for us, this is a round lug, so you could slide it on if you absolutely had to at the end, but it's just easier to do it now so you don't forget. So then we're going to get our flux on here. My brush already has enough flux. Go ahead and coat that wire with some good flux. What that flux is going to do is it's going to help pull the solder into the wire strand. So that's a challenge with having the thin strand stuff, is you got a lot of strands that solder needs to get into and bite into to make a solid connection. So get a good coating on there. Twist that down good. You can see there's a couple of strands here from being cut. I don't like that. I'm going to trim them off. Get a good twist on that. Another tip, it helps to have a vise handy or something to hold that, because as you're trying to heat that, that gets real hard to hold on to. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to heat the base. There's no point heating the top because heat rises, so. We're going to fill this cup with about 1/3 full solder, because as that cable pushes in there, it's going to displace that solder. You get any more than half, and of course it depends on the size of your cable. If your cable was a smaller cable, say if you had a 4 gauge instead of a 2 gauge, you'd need more solder in here just to take up that blank space around the outside edge. So as that starts to heat up, we're going to go ahead and we're going to get that to melt into our cup. Getting that filled up. And then while it's still hot, we're going to real quickly but carefully push that in here, because those strands will push out if we don't get it absolutely tight in there. And you can see some of that solder just pushed up just a little bit, which is good. Real quickly, because this is still warm yet, slide the heat shrink tubing on there. And you want to do that fast, because as your fitting is still hot, your heat shrink tubing is going to grab and start shrinking immediately. So then we're just going to throw a little bit of heat at it to get it to finalize the seal. Again, not too much heat, just enough. And there we go. We're going to let that cool. And there you have it. You have a soldered on battery cable that's going to last you a lifetime. So hopefully this helped. I'll throw them links in the description below. Thanks again. So we're back working on the Snowcat. Mainly we're finishing up some of the wiring for the winch. So in order to make sure this makes it all the way from the back, all the way down along the tunnel, up into our battery box, and not get caught on anything or get in the road or tangled up, is we're going to utilize some of these nice handy dandy stainless steel rubber banded clips. So these are 1/2 inch version or 12 millimeter. I'll put a link in there for that, but I've got 2 down already. And basically I'm just using a 14 by 1 inch tech screw to screw into this 3/8 inch angle iron. The reason I like the 14 is because it's heavy duty enough that they don't break off, that if anybody's used tech screws, you're very familiar with. So you know, there's half of a trigger pull in between too tight and not tight enough. So with that, we'll get mounting these on, and I'm mounting them every 16 inches to have a nice, keep it tight as it goes. So as that runs through. So to mount these in a nice uniform position, we take our clip here and we go ahead and we mount the one on the top side, and then the other side we mount in reverse, so that when we go to mount these, they'll screw together and there'll be a nice uniform spacing utilizing the same hole. You see that hole we already pre-drilled. Slip our tech screw through these, and then we'll go ahead and tighten it up. Okay, now we're ready to cinch it down. And I'm gonna take and tighten these wires in here just so that they get a nice no sag look to them. Reduce vibration. And I don't know if you could tell in the audio, but you can definitely tell when they get tight. And the one thing I'd recommend is do not over tighten or they break off. And that's how we're gonna get our, we're gonna go every 16 inches. We're gonna secure that along the tub. The nice thing about that, this will give us a nice secure point. If we have anything else that we need to tighten or zip tie to, this will give us a nice solid zip tie point to go with. So hopefully that helps. Okay, trying to wrap up these winch power cables here. So yesterday we got the back one all done, going all the way down and out. That turned out really well. The front winch power lead or jump start lead, whatever you want to refer to it as, it's got multiple options. So we got battery here under the passenger side compartment, and then the winch cable needs to run down and out to the front. The trouble we have with that is we have exhaust manifold right here. So my original plan was to run it down along the tub right here, but I think we're going to get too much heat coming off that exhaust manifold. So I'm looking at options to make it easy yet not in the road if we ever needed to work on the engine and that. So when we pull the side panels, everything be clear. But I think what the best option is going to be after working on the shift tower is I've taken and took this 2-inch piece of flat stock, and what we're going to end up doing is mounting that across here, and then that'll go from the front to the rear, and then we've got the holes drilled in here. So then we'll be able to actually take those stainless steel clamps and mount that winch cable directly onto that, and then that'll bridge across. And if we ever need to get at, if you know we pull a side panel off and you need to get below this for some reason and this is in the road, all a person's going to have to do is loosen the clamps off and take the bolts out, and then this bar will come right out, so you can have full access at the side of the engine. I still foresee that not being an issue because you'll have it fully open above and below that, but so here's a quick time lapse of this process going on. So anybody that does custom fabrication knows that there's multi-steps to this process. First you got the design phase, then planning, then fabrication, then you mock it up, you get it all installed, and then as soon as you're done making sure everything test fits, then you go ahead and take everything back out, then you prep it, you paint it, and then you go ahead and reinstall it for real. So just a little bit of that going on here, and then we get the lines all ran, and then here's a picture of it finished. So we've got everything attached and was able to use that bar also to attach the block heater, so that worked great. So if you like this video, give me a thumbs up, leave me some comments, and please subscribe. Thanks again.